Welcome everybody to a livestock webinar series. Let everyone get connected to audio. Make sure they can hear. Okay, this evening our webinar is So You Want to Have a Milk Cow, and we have two fantastic instructors. I'll do a quick introduction and then go over some housekeeping. We have Jenifer Cruickshank, the dairy specialist with OSU Extension, and Adrienne Lulay of Ostara Livestock Services. And Adrienne is also the cattle AI technician instructor for the Lynn Benton Community College. So we're very lucky to have them here today to talk to us about having a milk cow. With that, we'll get started in just a second. We ask that you either put your questions in the chat or save your questions to ask live at the end. We should have plenty of time for questions. It's just helpful so that we can kind of, the instructors can take a second and address them as we go, or we can, so we don't get too off topic, but we'll make sure they're all covered at the end and there will be plenty of time to get those in. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to our instructors.
All right, good evening. So Adrienne's gonna handle this first section. All right.
Okay, so what we wanted to do with this seminar too was just kind of make you a checklist of things to figure out before you even get a cow, maybe, or if you just started out with milking a home milk cow. And so what some of my veterinarian friends have said, and then a lot of my home milker clients and friends have said, one of the first things you need to do is to find a veterinarian in your area that has some experience with a home milk cow and establish a relationship with that veterinarian, because you're going to need them at some point for sure. And now that there's also the veterinary patient directive that you need to have a yearly visit with your vet to have them on site, have them look at your animals, and then they're able to prescribe you something if something does happen, if you need help with milk fever, that you have someone to call and just bounce ideas off of or ask them what's wrong. And then the other thing is I would really suggest find a mentor or two or three that are also milking cows. And so when you have day-to-day stuff that you just want to ask a quick question, you have somebody to call. And they've seen something before, because I've been doing this kind of thing for 20 years, and then you'll see something I've like never seen that before. And so you start calling your friends. So those are some really important things to figure out before you even get the cow. Another really big question is, what are you going to do with all that milk? You have to realize that initially she's going to have a lot more milk when she freshens, and then it lessens as she goes through her milk lactation curve. You're probably not drinking gallons of milk a day. So are you going to, share with the calf? Are you going to feed an extra calf possibly? Do you want to make cheese, butter, things like that? And that one of the other things to consider is just that this is a massive commitment. You're going to be out with that cow 2 times a day for 9 to 10 months while you're milking her. And so it's hard to go on vacation. You need to sometimes try to decide, like, maybe I want to dry her off by this certain time so that we can go on a vacation. Or do you have someone who's qualified to be able to milk that cow for you while you're gone? And then another big thing is, do you have enough land to support your cow? And I'm going to say that 99% of you are going to need to feed and supplement your cow quite a bit more. And cows are really big animals. And if you haven't had one before, maybe you're used to goats or something, the amount of food that they eat and their impact on the land is just many, many times more than some of the smaller animals. So those are just kind of some big considerations before you even get started with home milking. Okay, Jenifer, next slide. So kind of the fun part would be considering your cow selection. So if you don't have as much land, maybe you want to try to find a smaller cow, so size of cow. Temperament, there's definitely temperament differences between breeds. And then there's temperament considerations on like where you get the cow from or whether you raise it yourself. lifespan and like what their milking lifespan is compared to what a cow's natural lifespan is. I mean, if you have just a cow as a pet, she could live 20 years. But if you were milking her and asking for a bunch of production and trying to get her pregnant over multiple years, maybe her milking production lifespan is not as long. And then the production of that cow. So, I mean, you can see the little graphic of all the major dairy breeds. Those are all really big cows. And some of them produce a ton of milk. And maybe you just really don't want that much milk. So maybe you want a smaller breed or a crossbred or something like that. And so I'm going to go through a couple of kind of like the ones that I see the most and just kind of discuss the pros and cons of each one. So by far, the most popular one that I see as a home milker is a Jersey. They're generally smaller, like maybe 900 to 1,100 pounds. I would say that they're generally friendlier and have a quirkier personality than say maybe like a Holstein, which means they also can be kind of naughty. I always joke they're like aliens. They're always up to doing something or getting into trouble. And their milk production is maybe 5 or 6 gallons a day. 8 to 10 at their peak if you have a really high producing cow and you're also feeding her to accommodate that milk production. And they also have the highest fat content of the breed in that 4.5 to 5.5%. So if you are going to be making cheeses and butters and you want that cream, maybe the Jersey cow is the one that is going to work for you. And I would say what I've seen, I'm going to talk a lot about what I kind of see happening in the field. And I would say that maybe you can have a productive lifespan with a Jersey cow of around 8 years. An interesting thing about Jerseys is that they are more susceptible to milk fever as they age. For some reason, as a breed, they will go into milk fever after they calve more often than some of the other breeds. Real quick, there are also a lot of mini Jerseys I've been seeing more and more lately. They obviously produce less milk and they're not eating as much. I have struggled a little more with getting them pregnant and finding bulls to accommodate them. So that's something that to consider if you're looking into the mini breeds, is finding bulls that we can even use on those mini breeds. So, okay. So Holstein, much bigger cow, probably 1,100 to 1,800 pounds, some really big ones. I would say in general, they're kind of more of a standoffish personality. Obviously there's exceptions to all of them. And your average production is going to be much higher, 9 gallons a day, sometimes 10 to 12. If you have a high producing cow that you're feeding to the max. And they do have a lower fat content to their milk, so more like a 3.7% butter fat. So this is going to give you a lot of volume if you're wanting to maybe feed extra animals, calves, piglets, things like that. Maybe a Holstein is the right one for you. But in general, they're just so big, it's often too much for kind of a home milking situation. And I would say you probably have this productive lifespan around 8 years before you start running into some problems with reproductive health or just keeping them, in the condition that you want. Okay. So something that we're seeing a lot more popping up because of the beef on dairy breeding in the dairies is that there's a lot more of these Jersey Angus, Jersey Limousin crossbreds out there and heifers. And I think they actually are a really good consideration for a home milk cow because you can find they can be much smaller body size. And since they have that beef cow body, they have that tendency to maintain their body condition better and not make as much milk. And some of them are still going to make a considerable amount of milk, but that might be enough for what you're doing, to feed your family and even a calf. And then the other thing that gives you some flexibility is that if you breed that half and half cow to a beef bull, then her offspring will be a better like locker beef option for raising beef. If you have a purebred Jersey cow and say you breed her to a female sex semen, you have another cow that might be a great milker, but then how many milk cows do you want? And then you have to try to sell her. Or if you end up with a Jersey steer, it's maybe not as useful as far as beef production. It just takes a lot longer to get beef. And then also, I just think they have theoretically a longer productive lifespan because they don't milk as much of their body condition away. Because of more of that beefiness. Okay. Guernseys is one of the other ones that I see a fair amount of home milkers. They call them an intermediate sized cow, 5 or 6 gallons per day. There's an interesting thing about Guernseys. They make a very yellow colored milk because they have a bunch of beta carotene that they, for some reason, put into their milk. They also have high butter fat, up to 5%. There's also a lot of talk about the testing of the proteins that these cows are producing. And so 96% of Guernseys and also a lot of Jerseys are A2A2, which is the protein that a lot of people seem to be able to tolerate better as far as digesting dairy. Then also the Guernseys have a very high kappa casein gene, which is like a cheese making. You're going to have more protein, and it's makes a better cheese. This is kind of a rare breed. I do see them more than maybe like a brown Swiss or a milking shorthorn or like an Ayrshire. But you are going to have to work a little harder to find Guernsey semen. And in my experience, I've had a little more trouble getting them pregnant. And so a couple other options that I do see around, some people milk Dexters, so they're much smaller. So you're only going to maybe get a gallon or so of milk a day. And then I see a fair amount of Normandies as well, which are another really great cheese making breed. But just harder to source, harder to find those cows to begin with, and then harder to get semen to breed those cows. Okay. So the next question is, where are you going to get this cow from? And a lot of people will go and buy a cow from a large dairy, either conventional or organic. And there's, I'm not going to say one is better than the other. There's different uses for both of them. And you have to figure out what's right for you in your situation. But one of the things that I see a lot is that when you take a cow out of a large dairy situation where she's been bred for and raised to have extremely high production, and she is accustomed to having a total mixed ration delivered to her twice a day that has all of her nutritional needs in it, and then you move them to a home milking situation, they don't always transition that well. And one of the analogies I use is that you're taking a race car that's used to high octane fuel, and then you're bringing it to a home milk situation. You need to be prepared to feed those cows accordingly. And so I understand that people want to maybe do reduced grain or organic or things like that. But you're still going to have a lot of feed and very high quality feed, and work as hard as you can to balance that meal for that cow as much as you can, because that's what she's accustomed to. And that's what's going to get you the most milk production, make it worth it even having this cow. Another thing to consider, that if you get her from a dairy and she's used to either going into a parlor, getting on a big carousel, or going into a robot milker, is that she may not take that well to either hand milking or even just being milked with your small machine. And she's not going to be halter broke. She might be, tolerant, but not super friendly. Some of them transition really easily, and other ones I know people have struggled with just getting them to acclimate to that home milking situation. So really do your homework on it. Make sure you have a dairyman that's going to work with you and really be honest with you about what you're getting there. Okay. So if you don't buy a cow that's already in milk from a dairy, another option is to raise that cow from a calf and buy, say, like a heifer calf. So this is the fun part. You get to have a calf, but you do also have to keep her for 9 months. You have to raise her till you can breed her, and then another 9 months to calve her out and then begin milking. So you have several years possibly into this cow of raising her, probably at least $2,500 to get her to that point. And so there's a huge output initially to actually get to the milking. So it's probably easier to start with a cow that is already used to being milked, or from another home milker. I would actually suggest as being your best option is find someone that's been doing it for a while. They have found some of the genetics and the cows that do well in that situation, and they just have too many heifers. And so they're willing to sell you a cow that's already used to this kind of environment. If you do, raise your baby calf, you have the ability to halter break them, gentle them, get to know them. but that also means that you have to halter break and gentle them and teach them to be milked. I did hear one instance where someone had gone all the way through that and they could never break this cow to milk. And she did not want to be milked by hand or by machine or anything. And so it was really disheartening for that owner because they'd gone through all that time and then ended up with a cow that they couldn't even milk. So there's just risks to be aware of. So. And then, okay, so another consideration that you want to think about. Do you want to be organic or conventional, something in between, natural? Why is that important to you? I also want to say, don't be natural by neglect. Like, just because your animal is organic doesn't mean she shouldn't necessarily have vaccinations. Because she's organic doesn't mean she doesn't get higher quality feed. And I'm telling you this because I've seen it. And so I just want you to be cognizant of that. Also, are you willing to not treat your animal with antibiotics if she's extremely sick, because it's important for you to be organic? You know, I think it's our responsibility to take care of that animal as best we can. And therefore that means veterinary care and providing antibiotics. We have the antibiotics. And there's ways that we work around that if we treat a cow with antibiotics, we don't ingest the milk. That's how they do it in a conventional dairy. Whatever you want to do, just kind of ride it out, all the different directions and possibilities, and decide, why do you want to be this way and what's important to you for that. If you're going to go completely 100% organic, it's very expensive. It's harder to find feed for that. But sometimes you can find kind of a happy medium. Maybe you're not going to feed corn and soy, but you can feed her something else that's still going to give her that nutrition that she needs and be more natural. So, okay.
All right, so I'm going to transition a bit and talk a little bit about infrastructure and living conditions, and where would this cow be? So one of the important considerations is water, of course. They drink a lot of water. Dairy cows drink more water. If you have any experience with beef cattle, they're not cranking out the milk, so they drink water, but not as much. So if you're going to be hauling water by hand, you're going to not enjoy that part of your life, especially when it's summertime and it's hot and they're downing 50 gallons a day. So think about how your drinking water is going to be delivered, both in your indoor environment and your outdoor environment. What's that delivery system? What's that going to look like? Think about it in the summertime, and also think about it in the wintertime if we've got freezing temperatures. You know, what's your strategy around dealing with weather extremes? The second point about water is irrigation. So everybody's pasture looks nice right now at this time of year because there's plenty of water in the soil. The grass is growing like gangbusters. It's beautiful. Come July and August, or even earlier, if there's no irrigation, the pasture is not going to look like that. So whether or not you have the ability to irrigate, and that's going to be contingent on water rights, whether or not you've got water rights to do irrigation. And so that's going to lead to needing to be kind of strategic about the pasture and what pasture plants are grown. Some are more drought tolerant and do better in the heat of late summer than others do. So thinking about what that pasture is going to look like as we move through the season, keeping an eye out for noxious weeds. Some of them are poisonous. Some of them are poisonous enough to kill a cow. So definitely do a pass through of new pasture that hasn't been grazed before, and with an eye out for unpleasantries like that. And then also kind of thinking about what the grazing scheme might look like. A pasture is going to be a lot more productive with a rotational grazing scheme where it's not overgrazed and ideally not undergrazed. So there's some really great resources about grazing. So in the photo here, we've got a temporary electric line that is separated a larger pasture that's got more permanent fencing around the perimeter. And that pasture has been subdivided into smaller sections. And the cows were getting, 24 hours on this section, and then that temporary fence is moved. And so that allows that pasture to be a lot more productive than if you just chucked everybody out there with the perimeter fence and that's all they grazed. That's a lot less efficient way for them to utilize the plant matter that's in that pasture. So think about like, what could the fencing scheme be? And then there's you want to, of course, avoid overgrazing, because you want to give those plants time to recover and to regrow before you turn animals back out. So depending on what size of land mass you have, how much pasture space you have to work with, there may be a rotation that they actually rotate off the pasture completely to give the pasture time to recover. And another thing to think about is shade. So dairy cattle are pretty sensitive to high temperatures. They start to experience heat stress at about 68 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on where the humidity is. So if you're going to lock them outside where they don't have access to a barn, it's helpful if there's a tree or some other structure that can provide shade for them in the heat of the day. And just as a starting point for the grazing season and how much acreage of pasture you need, if it's irrigated, an estimate sort of, again, starting point, sort of the minimum would be 1 acre per animal. And these are based at around 1,000 pounds. So if you had a pretty standard Jersey cow, you would need an acre of irrigated pasture for her. If the pasture is non-irrigated and is good, so not just kind of randomly whatever happened to be growing out there, but is like very purposefully planted and maintained pasture, then you need 2 acres per animal. So this is the number of cattle per acre, and that's half a cow. So you need at least 2 acres of good non-irrigated pasture to support that animal. And again, in our climate, when we get to July and August, when it gets hot, most typical pasture plants, like our ryegrasses, they are not very happy, and they are not going to grow no matter how much water you put to them. So the grazing strategy and the feeding strategy may need to change with the weather. For non-pasture outdoor spaces, so in the wintertime, but you still want to give them some outdoor space. If there's not an area with concrete that's outside, I'm thinking about a sacrifice area. So what am I willing to have get trashed? And there's some strategies for mitigating mud in those areas so that it's not horrible, as in this picture, like, which doesn't even quite show you how awful that mud was. I took a walk through it, and I had to walk very slowly and like pull my boots up out of the ground with my hands, because it was very deep and very sticky. So for the indoor space, which again, in our climate in Western Oregon, your cow will definitely appreciate having a sheltered space in the wintertime, with kind of at least a roof and a wall on the side of the prevailing winter wind is most helpful. A lot of commercial dairies will have barns that are open all the way around, which is great for ventilation, but they tend to have really long roofs. And oftentimes there's going to be some additional structures that are going to help block, again, the prevailing winter wind, which in the Willamette Valley is coming from the south, loaded with a lot of water in many cases. So that's actually the case in this barn. That wall is on the south side. You also want to have some sort of working area. You're going to be milking this cow, so you need to be able to secure her for milking, but then also for any sort of veterinary work. Ideally, those two things are not the same place. Because you want your milking space to be a very positive experience space, and for any sort of vaccinations or she needs some other sort of treatment, Ideally, you do that in a separate space from where you milk. So we have positive milking space and maybe less positive other stanchion or headlock space. The other thing to think about is having light in those spaces. So whether that's natural light, or if you can put up, if there's electricity and wiring in some light, being thoughtful about the light, because doing stuff in the dark in January is really not fun. And if you need to do some delicate work because the cow is in ill health, like, you really, more light is better. So it can be tempting if you have access to like an old barn. You're like, cool, I have a shelter. But oftentimes old barns are not really the best in terms of ventilation. And for young stock, that's going to be really for baby calves, because they're have additional susceptibilities to respiratory illness. You want to make sure that there's adequate ventilation so that there's air moving through that space. And you don't want to build up of ammonia, and any sort of other stale air. So sometimes older barns can work great, but they sometimes may need some additional ventilation added to them, to keep air moving, which can be a fan, and a strategically placed fan. Of course, you want to think about bedding, what the options are for bedding in that indoor space. Do you want to set up some sort of stall structure where it's like you lie down in an orientation this way, or is it just kind of a free-for-all where there's a bedded pack area? What is that bedding going to be? If that's going to be straw, which is a great bedding, where is that going to come from? And then also in that indoor space, thinking about feed storage. So keeping feed dry is the most important thing. And again, kind of touching on the restraint, is having a secure space. And if your veterinarian does need to pay a visit, they're really, really not keen on standing there waiting while you chase a cow around and then tie her just kind of loosely to the fence. So your veterinarian is going to have a lot more positive feelings about working with you and your animals if there's a nice space to secure her when she needs veterinary care. All right. So going along with infrastructure is thinking about manure management. Again, in Western Oregon, leaving cows out on pasture is not really an option year round. It's just too wet in the wintertime, and you end up with all the mud holes like in the photo. So something that's important to remember is that you are responsible for the manure that's produced by your animals. And I'll talk a little bit about CAFO rules in a bit, but everyone is subject to ag quality rules. So if the manure from your animals is in any way polluting surface or groundwater, and somebody notices that, you are in violation, and they can call the Oregon Department of Agriculture and the CAFO program, and someone will come out and take a look. And if you are indeed violating agricultural water quality rules, you could be subject to a fine. Usually they start with warnings, unless you're really egregious. But just keep that in mind. The rules don't apply to large commercial operations. The rules apply to everybody. So in terms of manure handling, so something to keep in mind is like, how much is an adult dairy cow going to produce? So on a daily basis, that's going to be up to almost 2 cubic feet. And again, depending on how much water is in the manure, up to 119 pounds. And that's at 87% moisture. So this is not a small volume. Granted, a smaller cow will produce less manure than a larger cow. But an adult dairy cow is going to produce a lot of manure. She drinks a lot of water. She eats a lot of feed. She uses a lot of that water in the feed. A lot of the water is going to come out in the milk, but a lot of it is going to come out the back end. So thinking about where is it going to fall? So if she's out on a pasture, cool. Like that's dispersed manure. It's not being collected in any one spot. Unless things are really weird, you don't really have to worry about runoff from a pasture, manure that falls in the pasture. So that's good. Where we need to start to think a little more strategically is in those indoor spaces. Where's that manure going to be stored? Do you want to compost it? Certainly a viable option. Are you going to turn around and spread it back out on your pastures from your stored manure back out onto pastures? Is there potentially, is it going to be potentially exported from your property, or some of it could be exported from your property? Perhaps you do some composting and then you invite your friends over to be like, hey, if you want to come for some compost for your garden, come on over and take it away. And then the other thing is thinking about the equipment to move the manure, because a pitchfork and a wheelbarrow, you can do it. It's potentially a lot of labor, particularly if your storage pile ends up getting really big. So thinking about the mechanics of how you're going to store and how you're going to move that manure. The Department of Agriculture clarified their rules last year, such that operations that have 20 or more mature dairy cows, and that includes both lactating and dry cows, need a CAFO permit. So fewer than 20 mature dairy cows do not. But certainly it's a good idea to keep records about any manure applications. Again, should anybody come with a complaint about the manure on your property, if you have records that are like, this is where I did my manure applications, this is how much I put out there, that's going to help you should anybody come with a complaint. Plus it's useful if you go and do some soil testing at some point later to sort of be like, all right, you know, how can I help my pastures? Manure application is nutrients for the soil. So it's good to keep those records. All right, now we have some talk about nutrition and feed.
Okay, so this is very basic still, but just some things to kind of touch on. And something that I describe to a lot of people is that if you're looking at this cow from the front of her, her belly, if you're looking at the right side, but her left, is going to be very large and much higher. And that's because of her rumen. And so you need to remember that a cow's rumen can hold almost a 55-gallon drum full of liquid and feed that she carries around. And so when you see a great big rumen, when you see a great big cow, it could just be rumen. But if she's pregnant and very heavily pregnant, like this cow is, her right side, but we're looking at the left of it, is where the baby would be. And so usually they're kind of lower on their right side and then higher on their left side. And something that I hear a lot is someone will say, well, this cow's really fat. And it's because she's very wide. And that actually has nothing to do with her fatness. If her rumen is very full, she'll have a very large belly, but she doesn't necessarily have a good muscle covering or fat covering on her body, and doesn't reflect her nutritional status. And so sometimes you can see a cow is quite thin, and like over her hooks and pins in her back, she's thin, but she has this great big tight belly. And often that's actually a sign of too low of a protein in your forage or your hay or whatever. And since it's taking so much to digest it and possibly, chew it in her cud and then try to pass it, and all those bugs in her stomach need to work longer at it, she's getting less nutrition from what she eats because it sits in her rumen for a long time and it can't pass into the omasum, where she's actually going to start deriving nutrients from it. And so interestingly, a cow can actually eat more of a high quality forage because when she eats it, all those good bugs in her rumen digest it really fast. They pass it on to her lower gut, and then she can fit more in there to start digesting more. And so sometimes people will say, well, she has all the hay she can eat and she's eating all the time. Well, if it's a low quality forage, she just literally cannot ever fit enough into her system to get the nutrition that she needs. So high quality forage is probably one of the most important things for your dairy cow. And so when you're feeding your cow, she needs 2 to 3% of her body weight in dry matter. And dry matter means that if you go and get a flake of hay, it's not 100% dry matter, but it's going to be a much higher percentage, maybe 70 or 80% dry matter. But if she's eating grass, that's going to be much more water. The dry matter is much lower, so she has to eat more of it to actually get the solids from that food. So for example, if you're feeding a 1,200-pound cow, she's going to need at least 30 pounds of hay per day. And so that's almost like probably half of a bale of hay per day. And you want to get good quality hay, and you'll probably have to add some alfalfa to that, or some people can get clover and like haylage. And you want to push for really high protein content of that hay. And I can tell you right now that if you're buying local meadow hay from someone, it's almost impossible to get high enough protein. So you need to plan on supplementing with grain or a legume or something like that in addition to that. And then the next question is, do you want to be grain free or not? I kind of touched on this a little bit. There's lots of different things that are considered grain. And there's lots of different reasons why people maybe don't like grain or do like grain. So if you want to go soy free or corn free, there's grains out there that you can do that with and still provide the cow with those extra carbohydrates and fat. Maybe you just want organic, so you're willing to go ahead and feed her grain. But it needs to be organic. And like I said, it's going to be slightly harder to source or more expensive. And so most of the time, I just don't think you can maintain your cow's body condition without some grain or other sorts of supplements, possibly beet pulp, peas, like I said, alfalfa, or really, really good pasture that has excellent legumes, forbs, and high quality grasses. So you just need to be prepared that if you want to go grain free, you still are going to have to offer her lots of other options. And sorry, there was one thing I was going to say and I totally forgot. We'll go ahead and hop forward. And the next thing that you need to consider is having her on a really good mineral. And the simplest, if you're just starting out, go ahead and just like start out simple and maybe conventional. And as you get the hang of it, then start working on sourcing your organic stuff or your different supplements. And so what I tell most people to get is a Purina Wind and Rain mineral tub with Availafor added. And the Availafor is extra micro minerals that are attached to amino acids, and they're taken up through the gut better than an inorganic mineral. And it has extra selenium that we need in the Northwest. And then it has zinc and cobalt and manganese, which are also really important for reproduction. And if you go and buy one of these from your feed store, they're 225 pounds. And if you only have 1 or 2 cows, it's going to last you months and months and months. And the nice thing is it comes in its container. You can't spill it if you're, versus having like a loose mineral. And it's a complete mineral pack for that cow. And this has helped a lot of my clients get their cows pregnant, is just getting that mineral at a higher level. And then the other thing is that if you have that mineral tub out, you still need to provide salt for them. 2 separate things. They don't have salt in that mineral tub. And it's something that cows do crave. And cows actually only crave salt and phosphorus. So I know some people have tried sometimes you've seen like this whole mineral bar apparatus that has different minerals in each container. But cows don't have that nutritional knowledge to go get the minerals that they need. But they will, like I said, if they're low on phosphorus, they're low on salt, they will go and seek that out. And then something else to consider is that if your cow's eating 35 pounds of hay a day, you need considerable storage for that. And if you buy it all at once, that's approximately 5 tons of hay to store in a good dry area. A lot of people don't have that much storage. So in that case, you may need to buy it multiple times a year. You want to try to find a reputable hay barn that consistently has different options. The bonus of buying it from a hay broker is that they're going to know the percentage of their hays, and they're going to have different options. So if you're at a different part in the cow's lactation, you can maybe, get more alfalfa. Whereas if you're in the dry period, you can not be feeding her alfalfa. You can be feeding her just a good quality hay. And like Jenifer was talking about, they're going to make a lot of manure. So what's going in is also coming out. And so you're moving a lot of stuff through that cow. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of skip to, or jump forward to cow health. So if you're looking at the cow's lactational curve and what her body weight is and her milk production, so when she freshens, she should be probably the heaviest, and they have the most condition at any time in the year. And she's gonna quickly start milking the most and peak a couple weeks in. And at that point, she cannot eat enough food to maintain that high milk production. She is going to start taking from her body reserves to keep her milk production high. And then as we get later on into milk production, her production comes down, and she's now able to eat enough to bring her body weight back up. And so another thing to consider is that the time that we're trying to get them pregnant is right when they are milking the most, trying to eat as much as they possibly can, and they're also liberating all of these resources from their body. So that's why the kind of fresh first couple months is the most important part to manage in a dairy cow's life span. And then as we get near the end of her lactation, we can dry her off. We can not feed her quite as much. You probably reduce the grain unless you're trying to get some weight back on her. And she still needs good forage and good feed, but it's not as intensive. And then there's also some different strategies for when you get to the close-up period. And there's some things you can do to try to prevent milk fever as far as controlling how much calcium and different minerals they're getting. So that's a little getting more into more details. So we'll go ahead and move on. So body conditioning scoring is something that you need to do, and it's something you should record throughout that lactational curve of your cow. And if you look at dairy cows, a lot of times people say, well, dairy cows are thin. Well, compared to a beef cow, they may be thin, but you don't want them to be emaciated. When they're in that high lactation, they are liberating a lot of body reserves, but they still should have some fat covering, some muscle down their back. You're not looking at the size of their abdomen. You're looking at that back part of them, like in this graphic over their hooks and pins, their top line. And then another thing to consider is like, how does she just look overall? Does she have a shiny coat? Does it look healthier? Does she have kind of like dry hair, coarse hair? She's not shedding out like she should be at that time of year. And if you record it along with her lactation, then you can kind of see what's going on and say, man, we're just not feeding her enough in early lactation. We need to up that. The dairy body condition score is on a scale of 1 to 5, and beef body condition scoring is 1 to 9. But a way you can kind of imagine it is that the dairy cows just live in that bottom half of the cattle body condition scoring. You can get into like finer details, but that's kind of a generality. So again, if you're looking at that 1 to 5 in dairy cows, we're shooting for a 3. So she's not super fat, doesn't have a lot of fat around her tail head, but she's also not so emaciated that it's very concave around her hooks and her pins and across her back. And then again, you have to remember that her body condition is going to fluctuate based on where she is at in milk production. So maybe you're going to make some decisions about drying her off early if you just can't get that body condition up or keep it up. So you don't want her going into her next lactation way too thin. So maybe you have to make the decision to cut it off a little sooner and give her a longer dry period. All right, so obviously this is my specialty. But one of the most important things is to get milk from your milk cow, she has to be pregnant and have a calf. So that's why it's so important to have your reproduction dialed in. And so one of the first things to think about is matching, or is when you're going to calve. So maybe you want to match the cow's production to that really beautiful grass that we have right now. So maybe we want to be calving her out in March or April so that you can take advantage of that really good forage along with her higher milk curve right there. Also, if you're going to feed, do you have a good stall to house and calve your cow in? Do you need her to calve during the nicer part of the year when the weather's nicer? Or do you have a nice stall that you can bring her in and calve her out in that so that you have a successful calving? Also, do you want a break? Maybe you don't want to be milking a cow over Christmas. Maybe you want to go somewhere. So then you need to, again, like if I need to give myself a couple chances to get her pregnant, if she gets pregnant on her last chance to get pregnant, that means she's going to calve at this time, but that means her dry period is, the 60 to 90 days before that. So if you do need that break, or you need to be off farm, maybe you're going to tailor when you have when you're going to have your cow calve. And then the last thing is, if you have multiple cows, maybe you want to stagger them so that you have one calf in the spring, one calf in the fall, and then you have more consistent milk across the year. Excuse me. So if you had that calf that you raised up and then you're going to breed her for the first time, the absolute earliest would be around 12 months, and she should be cycling by that time and by that age. But that also means that she's going to calve at 21 months. So I don't really recommend that. I generally recommend that you're breeding closer to 15 months so that she's calving when she's 2 years old. And something to remember is that first time that she calves, she's still a teenager. So she is growing. Now she's milking. And she also has her daily metabolic needs to just walk around the pasture, breathe, eat, things like that. And so when you want to breed her for the second time, that's actually the hardest time to get them pregnant. Breeding the virgin heifer is actually quite easy. They are, have a great life. They're just eating, hanging out, and they don't have all those demands on their body. And then once you get to maybe their third, fourth calving, they should be closer to their mature body weight. And they're starting to get things kind of more dialed in. And she doesn't have that metabolic need for growth. So now she can give that to reproduction and milking. So something to consider if you have just one milk cow is knowing when your cow is in heat. So most cows and heifers cycle every 21 days. Sometimes it's 19 days for heifers, but a normal range is 19 to 23 days. And heifers are generally on the shorter side. So if you only have one cow at home, it's going to be much harder to detect heat. If you have another cow, another heifer, a steer, anything like that, those animals will mount her when she's in heat and she'll stand to be ridden. And then you can kind of start a timer and decide when to AI. But if you don't have that second animal, you have to learn your cow's cycle. And I do have a lot of people that are successful figuring out their cow's heat and tracking it by just knowing that she bellows a lot more, works the fence line. She's calling for a bull. She's pacing. She's being, generally different behavior at that time. You can check their vulva every day when you're milking or when you're checking on them. Look for a clear egg white like mucus. And if you can consistently track that and say, okay, I'm seeing this every 20 days or every 21 days, then you can go ahead and call an AI tech and say, I'm pretty confident that we're at the time to breed the cow. If you do have another bovine around to help you out, you can use some heat detection aids. You can use chalk or paint on their tail head so that if another cow rides it, it rubs it off. However, you have to reapply this every few days. What I recommend is just getting these Estrotech patches. They're like a sticky patch with like that lottery scratch off ticket coating. And so when the other cow rides it, it just scratches it off and you'll see that bright color underneath. Wilco Farm Stores does carry these. You can also buy big packs of them, like on Amazon, most of the animal health catalogs and things like that. Even though we call them heat detection aids, they are not based off of the heat of the cow. It's not a mood ring. It's literally just a physical scratching it off to show you that bright color and know that she's been ridden, and know that now you need to call an AI tech or get her bred, get a bull over there, stuff like that. So timing of AI, when the cow is going into heat, it's actually 36 hours till she ovulates. So we actually want to delay our artificial insemination to a later window. And the target window to breed AI is like 8 to 16 hours if you're using conventional semen. But with sex semen these days, you actually need to wait and to go on that later side of that window, 12 to 16 hours. And you also need to gauge whether you've been home all day and you know that for a fact she was not doing anything in the morning and she started standing in heat in the evening. Or did you see her multiple times a day, or you were at work? Maybe the sticker wasn't rubbed off in the morning, but it was when you got home. And make some educated guesses about it. Whether you're going to go for that 8 hours or the 16 hours. You're basically starting a stopwatch when you see her standing in heat. And I would suggest heat checking her twice a day. So if you are breeding a cow that has already calved, she should be cycling by 45 days postpartum. But initiation of cycling is based off of her fatness. The reproductive hormones are steroid hormones and those are the precursors for the estrogen and the progesterone. So she has to have that cholesterol and that fat in her body to be able to even start cycling. So if her body perceives that she is too thin, she definitely does not want to get pregnant. And so she's not going to begin cycling. This can be a problem if she goes into beginning lactation too thin, and then she's lactating, at her highest amount. She can't eat enough. She's losing more weight. It's going to take much longer to get her pregnant, and it's going to shift your entire milking window the next year. And also you'll get to where your milk production is low, is going down. And you have to decide whether to dry her off or to continue to milk her a little bit now because it took so long to get her pregnant. So this is kind of the fun part. What are we going to breed to? There's tons of options of bulls that have the double polled gene, which means that all of their offspring should be polled, no horns. The A2 gene, and also you can get female sex semen in pretty much any of the breeds. If you also, like I was saying, if you want to just have one dairy cow, maybe you don't want a replacement heifer, you can use male sex Black Angus semen, for example, and get yourself a bull calf that will then become a steer. So that's going to be a beefier animal that's maybe going to have higher marbling. It's going to have better growth. Just a side note, the sex semen seems to be about 95% accurate. And I have had people over the years that have been that 5% that got the wrong thing. And one other little note is if you're using sex semen, the conception rates are slightly lower. So I like to use sex semen maybe the first time we try to breed her. We know it's a really good heat. She's in good body condition. But if we're fighting some other factors, maybe we're going to stick to conventional that's 50-50 male-female. The prices for sex semen is about generally around $50, whereas conventional is going to be $25. Just as a side note, I charge anywhere from $100 to $150 to come out and just breed your cow. Like, hey, my cow is in heat. Can you please come out and breed her? Depending on your location, based on where I'm at. And so it's definitely a big factor to think about. It's still cheaper than having a bull on site, or trying to take her to a bull. But it is an expense that needs to be considered in your budget when you start with your milk cow. Calving ease is important for virgin heifers, but after they've had their first calf, Jerseys can calve out quite large calves with no problem. And most of the AI bulls these days that you're going to run into have pretty good calving ease. And so those are kind of the main things I think to think about when you're looking for the bull. Is number one, do I want a replacement? heifer. So do I want that polled, that A2? I'm going to start looking at some of the milking traits, maybe. They have EP, or well, they're TPI, sorry, or JPI. They have the statistics on whether they do well on grazing, whether they have, higher fat and solids. And you're in the dairy world, and then in the beef world, they have things like how well do they marble, their growth, carcass weight, things like that. So there's tons of options. The other beauty of AI is that you can get some strange breeds and pick and choose a little bit and kind of make some designer cows. Okay, so this is a really common phone call that I get. I will go and breed a cow, and then a couple days later, some bloody mucus will come out, and I'll get panicked calls that the breeding didn't work. It was all a failure. That it was all a waste and blah, blah, blah. It's actually not. It is actually a sign of there being high estrogen and a strong follicle and heat. So it's not a failed breeding. It's called metaestral bleeding or bleeding off. Cows do not menstruate. This is at a totally different time in their cycle. It's right after they're in heat. But what it does tell you is that if you're having trouble finding out when your cow is in heat, but you catch metaestral bleeding, she was in heat about 2 days ahead of that. So now you know to watch for her next heat 18 to 19 days after you see that discharge. Some other things about breeding costs, as I said, there are people that charge much less than I do. It is difficult to, just as a side note, if you want to learn to AI yourself, it's going to be difficult to get into enough cows to practice to become proficient to breed just your one cow, and then also maintain the cost of a liquid nitrogen tank, and just buying the tank, maintaining the tank, and then getting the experience in a whole bunch of cows. There are ways around it. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's just something to consider. So find an AI tech, find multiple AI techs in your area so that there will be someone available when your cow is in heat. If you have trouble catching your single cow in heat, you can synchronize her. So you use some reproductive hormones and a cedar, which is a controlled internal drug release. Looks kind of like an IUD. That cost is around $30 for those hormones and cedar. And then another cost to consider is figuring out that she's actually pregnant. So if you're going to blood test, it's only a few dollars to blood test. And if you can do it yourself, that's a huge savings. But otherwise, you might have to have a tech come out and do that, or you might have to hire a vet to come out and do ultrasound or palpation. And then just on that pregnancy detection note, the cheapest and easiest way to determine that a cow is pregnant is failure to return to heat. So if she's been consistently cycling and noisy and annoying, and you breed her and then that ceases, you can pretty confidently assume that she's pregnant. If she was kind of a quiet cycling cow to start out with, maybe you need to verify that she actually is pregnant. You can do a bioprint test as early as 28 days after breeding. And if you can learn to do that blood test yourself, like I said, it's just a couple dollars to do that test, or you can have a vet come out and palpate them. It's hard to find vets that are proficient at palpating early or ultrasounding, but that is probably the best way to say, yes, this cow is definitely pregnant. If you ultrasound at the right time in pregnancy, around day 50, 60, you can actually see the fetal gender, which is kind of just a fun side thing. And so then, okay, right, we've got our cow pregnant. We've got her to the end of her lactation. Now we need to dry her off. So like I said, maybe we need to add weight during that time. So we still need to keep that nutrition high. You will probably need to consider cutting her that high nutrition a little bit right when you dry her off. Also make sure that you dry her off properly. Helping seal up her teats, use a mastitis dry off kind of medications possibly. And then once you have her dried off, you're feeding her. You don't want her to get too fat. That can actually, too fat, like looking more like a big fat beef cow, can be a problem for the next lactation. But maybe that is your chance to gain some weight back. This is also the time that you want to maybe boost her with your vaccines about a month before she calves so that she has high quality colostrum. You want to deworm her, you want to make sure your supplies are all in order to start milking. And then next slide. As you get into that really close up, right around parturition and calving, you really want to make sure you have your supplies in order for a calving kit, towels, navel dip, scissors, ear taggers and tag. I like to give my calves a probiotic paste when they're born to kind of get their gut started. I also give my calves a BOC and or a multi-min shot, since, like I said, we are selenium deficient here. If you can, I would strongly suggest having at least chains and the handles for the chains if you need to pull a calf, or if you know someone close by that has a calving kit and a calf puller, that may be adequate. Have other basic first aid stuff on hand, like a thermometer. If she's going to have a bull calf, you need to be prepared to maybe band it right away. I see a fair amount of bull calves that get missed early on, and then it becomes more of a difficulty getting them castrated later. Something that I've learned more recently is that you should get a really good magnesium calcium gel. My vet recommends having this Magna gel on hand. The CMPK gel that you can get in the feed store might keep her from dying. It might perk her up a little bit, but then ultimately it's not enough magnesium and calcium for her. And so I would consider having this high quality Magna gel on hand so that you can deal with a milk fever. I don't know what it is, but cows always get sick on like a Friday night when it's not office hours or it's a weekend, and it's more difficult and way more expensive to get a veterinarian out. Other things you need to learn to evaluate for are ketosis. So if she's liberating too much fat, her body's going to go ketotic. And then also mastitis, you're going to see that early in the, early lactation, most likely. And then also you want to watch for uterine infections. If she had a difficult calving, if she had twins, if it was breech, things like that, you're more likely to have uterine infections. And often a mild uterine infection can impede fertility, but you might not see outward signs of that. If she has a really bad uterine infection, you're going to see temperature, you're going to see discharge, different than just the first week or two after calving. You'll see like a purulent, significant amount of discharge. And that's, again, time to be getting a vet out and considering treating your animal for that, so that you can actually get her pregnant again. Just a quick note on calving. Heifers may take longer than cows, up to a couple hours from beginning to end. But once you actually see like an amniotic sac, or she's like really working, they should be making progress every 20 to 30 minutes. So first you want to see that water bag, the amniotic sac, then toes, then a nose. If she's not making good progress, that's when you need to start getting in there and investigating, possibly calling a vet or a friend that has experience with that. I would study up on the calving process, know what's normal, what's not. And then be prepared to get up there if you can. Once baby's out, clear the mouth and nose, and then go ahead and let mama take care of her. With a milk cow, and depending on whether you're going to be calf sharing or milk, or just feeding the calf from a bottle, I would still actually suggest just milking her out, making sure that calf is getting about a gallon of colostrum over the first 24 hours, a little less for a Jersey calf, more for a large calf. And then save the rest. You might need it for a different calving or for a neighbor. And that's just it's like gold to have on hand. So double bag it, freeze it, and keep it for later. If you do thaw out frozen colostrum, don't microwave it, put it in hot water. There's an Instagram reel that is like the whole calving process. I don't know if it will play, but you guys will have a copy of this later that you could go to. So Jen, were we going to try to do it, or are we going to? You're muted. If you want, you can also just go to, like, if you're on Instagram, you can go to Lulay Livestock Company, and I made a whole reel of the entire calving process with one of my cows. And so It just kind of describes it, what's normal, what's not, things like that.
I think maybe we like view at home.
Yep, view at home. Okay. All right, like I mentioned, now you have this calf. Are you going to bottle feed it? Are you going to share with the cow? What a lot of people that want a calf share, what they'll do is they'll leave the calf on during the day. Then at night, they put calf in a little pen next to mom in a stall. Then you go out in the morning and you get your milk, and then you have that time to process it for the day and use it. And then you turn them out and baby gets to nurse. But initially, the calf is not going to keep up with the cow. It's going to be the amount of milk that the modern dairy cow makes is way more than a calf needs. So something that you need to watch for is like milk scours, just really white scours, because they're drinking so much milk. You might actually need to pull them off a little bit. And then initially also you may be milking twice a day still and calf sharing if you have a really high producer. There is a protein that is in milk called FIL, which is the feedback inhibitor of lactation. And so if the cow's not milked out and that protein builds up, it tells her body, you're making too much milk, stop making so much milk. But if it's constantly being emptied by a calf or by you, or those cows that are in a dairy that they're being milked 3, 4, 5 times a day, if they can go to a robot, for example, that you're emptying that out. And so her body's going to say, I need to make more milk. I need to make more milk. And so that can be a good thing if you want to increase your production, but it also means that she needs to eat more. And she's also going to start to try liberating resources from her body. So that's also why you don't necessarily want to, you can't skip a milking. Or if you do, you have that, it's going to tell her body to start lowering her production overall. All right, let's turn over to Jenifer.
All right, so yes, you've got a calf on the ground. So you kind of can't overemphasize the importance of colostrum and how critical that is to calf health. So that's really sort of, assuming the calf is born alive, which hopefully it is, that is really the first order of business, is making sure that that calf gets colostrum in it. The challenge with letting the calf nurse itself and being like, all right, she probably got enough, is you don't actually know if she got enough. So the advantage of taking that, milking out that colostrum yourself and then feeding the calf either with a bottle, if they're going to be good and take a bottle. If they're not able to take a bottle, then using an esophageal feeder to give them that colostrum as early as possible, definitely within the first 24 hours, but as early in that 24 hours as possible, because this is the calf's immune. This is how she's going to function immunologically for the first couple of weeks. So it's really, really critical. So definitely having a plan for how you're going to handle colostrum before the cow calves is really important. So yeah, you've got this newborn calf, and Adrienne mentioned some of the initial treatments, like giving a BOCI injection, some sort of oral vaccine, or a probiotic on day 0 is really helpful. Being prepared to deal with common ailments, such as scours. So diarrhea in calves is really, really common. So being aware of monitoring that, and then the point in which you need to take action. And then also respiratory ailments is kind of the other thing that can really take a calf down. So being aware of what to look for with regard to respiratory health. And again, this is where good ventilation is important, along with, other aspects of good husbandry. Our dairy calves, if you've got a beef calf, they're sturdier, they're huskier, they've just kind of got a little more to them. But if it's really, really, really cold, even they will appreciate having a coat in the wintertime. Dairy calves, generally not quite as robust as beef calves or even dairy beef crosses. So they can appreciate a coat in the wintertime. The other thing is having a nice straw bed for them to nestle down in also is really, really useful, and is really good at keeping them warm overnight. So then the comes in the feeding, and Adrienne talked about this a little bit. You know, are you going to keep the calf on the cow, separate them for half the day or a particular number of hours in the day? Are you going to feed the calf off to the side? Are you going to perhaps purchase another calf because your cow's producing a lot of milk, more than perhaps your household can drink? And so you're like, what should I do with this? Maybe I'll go buy a calf from a dairy. One of those 5%ers of dairy bulls, that really don't, the folks who are raising beef animals or dairy on beef crosses do not like those straight beef or straight dairy steers. They are not popular at all. So you can get one of those really cheaply if you want to raise some beef yourself. And if you've got a dairy cow producing a lot of milk, that could be a good outlet for some of that milk, is to raise up a calf for beef. They make lovely beef, Jersey steers, very tasty. They just take a really long time to get to a mature size for harvesting beef, which is why the beef industry does not like them. And then thinking about, you know, transitioning that calf to a starter grain and onto hay, when's the weaning age going to be? And that may be defined if you are hand feeding that calf, or if you've have the calf on its own dam. So thinking about the milking your cow, so you definitely need some equipment. If you are hand milking, the equipment list is pretty short. Really kind of need a bucket, and knowledge of how to actually manipulate the teats to get the milk to come out. You get really strong hand muscles if you're doing very much hand milking. If you're like, well, hand milking is not for me, you can purchase a machine. So to do machine milking on a single cow at a time. So we need a vacuum pump, a pulsator, some sort of bucket, and then the claw along with the teat cups and the liner sitting in the teat cups, and then hoses. So in this photo, we've got a really old style bucket milker. It doesn't have to be hanging from the cow. I was really excited to find a picture of this, because where it's actually suspended from the cow, because you can also have the bucket, potentially if your udder is at the right height, or you've got a different hose set up. There are others where the bucket will sit on the floor, and you've got a hose going to your claw and onto the cow. But these old surge bucket milkers, which you can find around, were designed to have this sort of suspension system. But this piece, we don't see the vacuum pump in this photograph, but we do have the bucket. The pulsator is sitting right on top of the lid, with the hose going into it. And then we've got the claw and the teat, with the teat cups on the cow itself. So one of the things that if you do machine milking is being aware of what the settings should be, both on the vacuum pump, so that the vacuum is not too high nor too low, and also on the pulsator, that also needs to be appropriately set. And then maintenance on those things, on both the vacuum pump and the pulsator. Those things do require intermittent maintenance. So cleanliness is really, really, really important. So for preparation of the udder, using some sort of pre-milking teat disinfectant or a washing solution, along with a clean cloth or a paper towel is another option for cleaning the teats. Making sure that the equipment is also clean, and making sure that it's also food grade. If you go wandering around on YouTube, you can find some extraordinarily frightening homemade setups for milking cows and goats that'll curl your hair. So frightening. Making sure the equipment is clean and is appropriate to the task. And once the milking is done, then applying a post dip, which is going to be different from the pre-milking teat dip. That post dip is going to protect the teat end to prevent, while the teat sphincter is closing, which takes about a half hour, it's going to protect that teat end and hopefully keep bacteria from inhabiting the space. And a lot of post dips also have some emollients in them, so they're actually good for the skin of the teats. In thinking about the handling of the milk, and again, we're right back to cleanliness. So we want the teats to be clean. We also need our milking equipment to be clean. So ideally having some at least, we ideally want some separated space where milking happens here, which the milking space, ideally we're also keeping that as clean as possible, but you have a cow in it who has potentially come in off the pasture or in out of the barn. And so her feet are going to be dirty. Her tail might be filthy. She may defecate while you're milking her. So that is not going to be you don't want to be handling milk in that space. Regardless of how well you clean it, you don't want to be handling your milk there. So you want to be taking your milk in your closed bucket to a separate space where you're going to do your milk handling, and also where you're going to actually do the cleaning of your milking equipment. And for an effective cleaning process, you need to remove the soils. So that is the milk itself. So some sort of soap is used at this step. And then a rinse, and then an acid rinse. And the acid rinse helps to prevent mineral deposits from building up, which is sometimes called milk stone. So that acid rinse helps wash that any minerals that may be deposited on your equipment. And then a water rinse. And then air drying is really, really useful because bacteria loves damp places. And so if your equipment has a chance to completely air dry in between uses, that's also going to be effective at minimizing bacterial colonization and growth on your equipment. And then it's a good idea to apply a pre-milking sanitizer to your equipment shortly before milking, so that if, any germs blew in on the breeze during the day or overnight, you're going to zap those really quick before milking. So the milk handling itself, it's a good idea to filter the milk to just kind of get any sort of big chunks out that may have fallen in. Ideally, you want to get that milk chilled down as quickly as possible. So that's going to be potentially separating it into separate containers if you're just going to put it straight into the fridge, or figuring out a way to put sort of a cold core into a larger container to get it to chill quickly, again to reduce bacterial growth. There are home pasteurizers that are available. There's some depicted here. Countertop pasteurizers. You can also do it on the stove. There's some resources at the end on how to pasteurize milk at home. And then also sterilized containers. Glass is a really, really good container to store milk in, and those can easily run through the dishwasher. So pasteurization versus raw milk is certainly a choice. There's risk associated with consuming raw milk, particularly for very young children, for elderly folks, and for anyone who's got a compromised immune system. That risk is increased. So certainly that's a personal choice, but raw milk carries additional risk that is not visible. All right, so I think we're headed into your questions. We do have some resources here. Again, these slides will be made available to you. This list has gotten shorter. I went through and I'm like, oh, they aren't in business anymore for one of them. These are, I've checked all of these. So these are equipment suppliers. A note about Crystal Creek, they are local in the Willamette Valley. But they do service big commercial dairies. They will sell smaller quantities of stuff like pre-dip and post-dip and that kind of thing. But just if you go to their website, like they do service really large dairies, but they will also sell smaller quantities to smaller operations. All right. So I think we're ready for questions.
You're welcome to take yourself off mute and ask questions or put questions in the chat. Well, perhaps Adrienne and Jenifer did such a thorough job. You have left people with a lot of thoughts. Oh, here we go. Just took some time to type. So one question is, does OSU have nutritionists available to speak to about designing feed programs?
So I wish I could say yes to that. But in our extension core, we do not have anybody with a really solid background in dairy nutrition. So we could, certainly I could direct you to some resources and there are some in the lists in the slide deck. So we definitely could give you some kind of guidelines on a feeding program, but actually sort of like formulating a diet, probably not so much that, but certainly getting hay that's been tested can go a long way to setting up what a good diet for your cow.
Kelly followed up with, we lost our extension service in our county, so all resources are appreciated. And Callie and Callie, we feel for you, and we'll try to get some resources out to you. Jenifer, what do larger scale dairies do as far as developing their nutrition programs? Do they work with consultants for that?
Yeah, they really do. Pretty much all of our commercial dairies have a consulting nutritionist who helps formulate their diets. And they're really, and that's going to be a diet for the heifers and for the, sometimes early lactation versus mid versus late lactation cows. And then the dry cows are getting a different diet. So it's my background is not in there, so I'd hesitate to do much more than generalities because it's really not my area.
There are a bunch of good forums that are like home milk cow, like on Facebook, and there's a lot of people that will share their knowledge with you and kind of tell you what they're doing and what's working. And so I probably suggest, trying to find some of those. And then, but basically, I mean, you just need a good quality grass hay and alfalfa. You're going to be adding alfalfa. And then when she begins lactating, you're going to have to add some sort of extra carbohydrate and fat in, and protein. So that's probably where you're going to go to a grain of some sort. And they have like just dairy feed at the local feed store. And you're going to be feeding pounds and pounds of it. I think that's something to kind of normalize in your head, is that, the general scoop that we use is for like feeding animals is like 3 pounds. You might be feeding 10 to 20 pounds of grain a day, depending on your cow.
Yeah. And I mean, the nice thing about having one cow is that it's really easy to pivot on that too, is to make adjustments. Like a larger dairy, that's a little more challenging because of the quantity of feed that they're dealing in. But it's on the scale that we're talking, it is really easy to make adjustments, and tracking body condition is really helpful.
Great, thank you. And then there's a question, is vinegar a good disinfectant for equipment?
I'd say it's probably adequate. It's probably adequate. there are commercial products that it's probably fine. It may be probably not for all the steps. I don't know if we're talking about just sort of that pre-milking sanitizing, because with the commercially available ones, they're at a really low concentration, and so you don't need to rinse them, which is nice. I suppose you could not rinse the vinegar as well, which may lend a little bit of flavor potentially. So. Melissa, do you want to go ahead and ask the question for the recording?
Sure, yeah. Okay, so is it smart to start a herd share for our cow? So another way to share the milk?
So I'll just put out there that if you are providing milk to other people, particularly raw milk, you are taking on additional risk and liability. So I would give some very, very serious thought to going in that direction. And I know there are plenty of folks out there who are doing that. But I would think very seriously about providing raw milk to other people because of the liability that sits there that is different than if you're just consuming it within your own household. And you can certainly do, so herd shares kind of exist in this kind of funny gray area within the state. So you can sell milk with a license exception. If you are selling milk from 2 or fewer milking cows or 9 or fewer milking goat or sheep. And with that license exception, you can sell from directly to your customer on farm. So it has to be on farm sales. Herd shares kind of move into this really gray area because ostensibly the people who are in the herd share are co-owners of the cows. So they're not really exactly your customers because they are co-owners of the animals. So herd shares kind of operate in a really gray area. So they aren't really covered by Oregon Department of Agriculture rules as they exist now. So I think I would just, if it's going to be raw milk, think really hard about the liability that comes with providing raw milk to others. And certainly if folks are interested in having very, very hyper local milk, and they're okay with it being pasteurized, that's going to be a safer route to take.
My gut, and from what I've seen, would be to not do it. I would find either pigs, lambs, other animals that you can feed excess milk to. If it's too much for your family, in addition to calf sharing or maybe an extra calf to start out, I'd say get really good at what you're doing for yourself first. Me personally, I'm gonna be really blunt. I would never want that liability. There's a reason that we pasteurize milk, and there's diseases that will kill people. And so but if you are going to go down that steps, then do it right. And there's a bunch of support for doing that. You need a milk test and make sure that you don't have Staph aureus, that you don't have these pathogens in your milk, and that you're doing everything clean enough, you're cleaning your equipment well enough. And so I'm also a big proponent is that people want to do this. It can be done well. I see people doing it really well, but it is a ton of work and it's a ton more steps. And so that's my personal opinion, and for what it's worth.
Yeah, and I'll just add that that there are labs, and that's actually something I'll add to the resources. There are a couple of labs that will do testing for food pathogens. So we have two different ways to think about milk testing. So one of them is testing for pathogens that are making the cow sick, that are giving her mastitis. And then there are the pathogens that are problems for human health. And those are mostly not the same pathogens. And so you're requesting different testing if you are like, I want to know what's making my cow sick versus I want to know if there's anything here that's going to make people sick. And there are some folks who are selling raw milk and they are doing testing, but they're doing testing like once a month. And so it's like, okay, so on that day, the milk was good and clear, but that doesn't kind of say anything about 2 weeks from that day. So there's not really a feasible way of testing for food safety on like a daily basis, that's really realistic. And so folks are testing for food safety pathogens at an interval, which is good. It's better than nothing. And it kind of tells them a little something about, their process and their overall cleanliness and sanitation very generally. But it certainly doesn't tell you about like day to day, and a pathogen can show up 10 days after the last clean test. And you can't see it, you can't smell it, you don't know it's there. So